Alrighty guys, so we're going to test a couple of things that I was talking to people about on Reddit earlier today. A couple of questions I thought were kind of cool. Not really questions, but were just things that came up, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I can test a few things. In the background you can see the stock Kerbal X craft, which has a little over 6,000 Delta V. I will be sticking a MechJeb unit on it here in a minute. And the question that I posed earlier that I thought was just a dawn on me, never occurred to me, is how much Delta V does it take if you go up and just turn right? Like, as ungracefully as possible, right? We're always talking about fuel efficient to orbit, and we talked about how 3200 is pretty good for a fuel efficient descent, you know. But what happens if the totally new player just wants to say, you know what, I hate aerodynamics, forget aerodynamics, this is stupid, let's just go straight up, right? Because we know before that if we go straight up, we can punch through the atmosphere very fast. We know that we can make non-aerodynamics rockets go straight with very little problem. So we're going to take the old faithful here, and we're just going to go straight up. And then roughly about, say, I don't know, what sounds fair, killer apoapsis around 80 kilometers, 100 kilometers, something like that, and then try and see if we can actually get an orbit established at that time. Now, I will probably actually burn a little bit in atmo, because somewhere around 60 or say you can turn your rocket quite a bit and not get any drag on it, so we'll probably see if we can cheat a little bit. So 3200 meters per second versus Kerbal X, which its maximum delta V is quite a bit higher than that, 6428. So I have one concern about this rocket. This is built without any kind of reaction wheels whatsoever, except for the capsule. And as you can see here, a lot of our delta V is the lower half of the rocket, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick an advanced reaction wheel in here somewhere so that we have a little bit more torque on the lower end, and that's just because we're going to have to do an extremely hard right turn while the rocket is still moving, and I don't think we're going to be able to do it with just a capsule. Either way, so we're going to try it. Let's see what happens. Those of you who may have played this game from the olden days remember Asparagus Staging. Those who are new to this game probably don't. Really? This is what you get whenever you play with other people's rockets. Kids don't play with other people's rockets. Alrighty. Either ways, so back in the early days of Kerbal, whenever you could do all sorts of gimmicky crap and it would let you, there's a thing called Asparagus Staging where you can make these big, giant, fat rockets that, like, literally were flying pancakes. And I don't know if you can still hear me or not, because the sound on my end got really loud all of a sudden. Anyway, so big old fat rockets, and they would just stage in little tiny bits all around the outside of the rocket. Matter of fact, I have a design I use to send like 1,000 some odd tons into low Kerbal orbit. I've got to turn this down, like, I cannot hear myself. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so yeah, you would send these just giant amounts of rocket up into orbit, and nowadays you can't do that because you're going to be pushing so much atmo, your rocket will never, ever, ever want to stay straight. And you know, it occurs to me, I don't think I've flown Kerbal X since, oh, nearly 23 maybe? God, I don't know, when was Kerbal X a thing? When was it introduced? I started playing Kerbal Space Program before we had parts this size. Alright, here I am. I'm going to go ahead and start my turn. I actually waited a little bit too long. I'm at 65 kilometers. And we're going to go ahead and see if we can try and do this as gracefully as possible. And by gracefully, I mean not crashing. Now this is a good time to talk about orbits here. I might do this later, depending on how much time I have. You'll notice that I've got the apoapsis height on here. And what I'm doing is I'm feathering left and to right of horizon to keep my apoapsis roughly right about the same. Now, this is actually pressing against the radial and anti-radial indicators so that you can actually shift your orbit around. It's kind of hard to explain this. Maybe I'll try and show you earlier or later. And the idea being is that I really want to keep my my apoapsis just right barely in front of my craft. I can give extra height to it if I want to. I can remove height if I want to. Ideally, you want to keep pressing towards your prograde vector to be most efficient. But I always want to keep my apoapsis just a little ahead of me so that there we go. Okay, circular. Close enough. And let's see, that's 2470, so roughly 4,000-ish, 3950 meters per second delta V. That's, I'm actually really kind of surprised. I was expecting to be a whole lot more than that. Considering we know from experience we can get into orbit from 3200, 3950 is not bad. I mean, you can over-engineer a rocket by 25%. Still, that's pretty good. Okay, now let's talk about orbits a little bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust my orbit because I want to get a little bit of a bigger orbit. Let's say we want to. I'm going to quick save here. Let's say that we wanted to go to a polar orbit from where we are right now. Well, first of all, we're not going to do that because our current stage only has 78 meters per second. Bye. Okay, so let's see, we got 80 by 74, that's not too bad. Alright, say that we wanted to change our orbit to a polar orbit. We've got 2386 meters per second delta V, and we want to do it as efficiently as possible. So the game would tell you to wait until you get to a apoapsis or periapsis, or if you were targeting another planet, you would, let's do actually a minimus here. You would do it at your ascending or descending nodes, right? So normally the game would say, hey, make a maneuver node here, adjust your normal or anti-normal to change your orbit, right? Kind of eyeball it, whatever. Right, there you go. See, that's kind of close-ish. But if you look at the way that the game does this, it's going to give you a maneuver node, and you're basically going to burn straight. Now, it's hard to explain what this does in terms of game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate for you here, changing it, and then I'm going to go back to my quick save I made just a second ago, and then I'm going to demonstrate it again the way I'm going to try and have y'all do it. So the difference is if you burn straight, what will happen is a lot of that delta V will get transformed into lateral momentum. So you'll end up with an orbit that's out here, it'll be elliptical, and then you have to burn fuel to correct it, depending. In this case, I might be trying to actually intersect minimus, so I might want it to be, you know, further out that way. I might actually do an orbit or an inclination change as part of my ejection burn, which would be really cool if you were trying to make a nifty Manly-esque, you know, pool shot out there. So what I'm going to do though is, since I'm not that good, I'm going to go ahead and change my orbit first. Now, let's go ahead and do this burn. We're going to lock to maneuver, and we're going to do this burn exactly as planned, assuming I don't time accelerate too far. And we're going to half split our burn 9 seconds before and 9 seconds after. Alrighty, there we go. Now, I want you to look at your or your radial node here, not radial, normal and anti-normal nodes here at the bottom, and notice how far off that has come from our burn. Okay, so all of that is lost potential. Now, if you look out here, you'll notice that our apoapsis now is 10, 15, it's almost 20 kilometers higher than what it was before. It was 74 to begin with. So we've wasted delta V. So if you wanted to, say, make a very, 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 very large inclination change, the game will have you burning the same direction for a very long time. And you'll notice the inclination changes ever so slightly, but the whole time you're just losing delta V out here. See? We're just losing delta V. And that, you notice how our normal indicator is getting further and further and further and further and further and further away. And this becomes more and more and more inefficient the longer we burn away from normal, or anti-normal. So, let's go ahead and stop that. Let's go back to our quick save. We're going to go ahead and do this burn again more intelligently. Now, let's look at our maneuver here. And we're going to notice that that's going towards the normal normal marker. So I'm going to go lock to normal, actually. And then I'm going to time accelerate to where this burn should take place. Where you know it's roughly 18 seconds. So it's going to be about the same amount of delta V anyways. Now watch this. Since we're following the normal indicator at this point, you're going to notice our orbit stays the same, but notice how we're going away from where the maneuver node says to go, right? Bam, there's our orbit, looks nice and pretty, right? Now let's look at the other side. Look at that, 76K, barely changed. So what this is doing is it's taking all of that momentum and putting it where it's best supposed to be. So say we wanted to make a very large inclination change here, right? We could just keep going, and I'm gonna time accelerate. Now notice I'm doing physics acceleration here instead of time acceleration because I've got my engines on, and we're making a nice long change. We talked about polar orbits earlier. That's kind of what I'm going for. Assuming we have enough delta V, we're going to strand our poor Kerbals in a polar orbit. Now, what did we have earlier? 2,400 something delta V when we started this gig. Man, we don't even have to make them to polar orbit. Our orbit's nice and very similar. We've wasted very little, but it's just not enough to make a large inclination change. So let's try this one more time. What we're going to do now is and I don't know if there's a term for it. There probably is, and I don't know it. What we're going to do is we're going to make an ejection burn. Okay, so we've used a little less than 1,000 delta V at this point, 930 something, whatever. So we're going to go way out here. Alrighty, so say we want to be circling Kerbal this way. We're going to do a normal burn, right? And that's already going to totally mess up my other end. You can tell that really easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to lock normal. Now you can do this manually. We don't have to use the autopilot to do this. Just requires a steady hand. And we're going to time accelerate until we're right here. There we go. Now we're doing this all kind of without any guidance here, but I'm going to make a very tiny burn. Notice how I'm giving it hardly any gas at all. Okay. There we go, nicely vertical. And we've used 50 meters per second, give or take. Now we've raised our periapsis just a little bit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to knock that back down while I'm out here, while it's more fuel efficient to do. However, I need to make that really slow. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to modify my engine so the thrust on it is really low. And then I'm going to go ahead and make that burn again. Just, once again, giving it barely any gas. Alright, there we go, 82. That's good enough. Now we're going to need that engine at max power eventually, so let's set it back up. Okay, so we've made all our corrective burns here. We've used about 70-ish meters per second out here, and we're going to go back down and we're going to recircularize. Or I could totally, overshoot because I thought we were going the other direction. So, that's good. I mean, we've got 469 meters per second delta V. So for something that we couldn't do in a closed orbit for 2,400 delta V, we managed to do for less than 2,000 delta V just by going out as far as you can. Now, as I mentioned, I probably didn't mention, I mentioned it online, but I'll mention it here. This is more efficient the further away from an object you are. Okay? So, The reason this came up is somebody was talking about entering into Moon's SOI and making plane corrections because they didn't like how they were lining up. They were getting a really highly inclined orbit and having a lot of trouble. So what I do is, as soon as you enter Moon's SOI, you make a planar correction so that you're kind of roughly level-ish. It's not always able to do that. Sometimes you'll get this weird corkscrewy orbit around Moon. Sometimes you won't. But the point being is, make all of your orbit adjustments the second you're in the SOI for Moon. That way they cost you the least amount of delta V. And once you've gotten your periapsis really close to Moon, like 10 kilometers, just barely above the mountains. Technically you can go down to like 7-ish, but I wouldn't advise that for inexperienced players. You can get a little too close and accidentally litho break if you don't know what you're doing. So 10 kilometers is probably the closest. Realistically, I shoot from like 15. The thing is, the closer you are, the more efficient it is, planet side, to do entrance and ejection burns, right? But it is more efficient to change orbits and stuff very, very far away from the planet because you're moving very, very slowly. So a little bit out there. Basically what it boils down to is this is all orbits. The further you are away from something when you make your correction burns, the more of an impact it's going to have. So like if you're trying to go from one planet to another planet and you want to get really, really close over there, you really want to make your burn as accurate as possible, leaving Kerbin's SOI, leaving Kerbin low Kerbin orbit. If you can go from low Kerbin orbit and directly into hit the planet, that's the best you can do. But if you can't, because the game, you know, has a floating point calculation and it drops some of those points and it's not always exactly accurate, what you do is you make little tiny correction burns so you're as accurate as possible. So roughly, think in thirds. You know, we all talk about doing things in thirds. So make your ejection burn, get as close as you can, about a third of the way into your path, make another burn, corrective burn to get closer, another third, make another corrective burn, and then as soon as you get into the SOI of the planet, make your orbital burns so that it all lines up nicely for whatever orbit you're trying to do. And we'll talk about using gravity assists sometime much, much later because I don't think I have time for that right now. Either way. I think that's it for now. Radial and anti-radial. It's a way to shift your orbit left to right. So you get on the offside here, and I'm a little low over here and I'm a little high over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot anti-radial, which is into the planet. And if you notice, these markers, the arrows point in whenever you're going against something and out whenever you're going with it. So I'm going to go ahead and do this and try and circularize this a little bit, because what I want is I want this one to come up and this one to go down. So I want to burn in, and what that's going to do is it's going to put force to shift all of this that way. We'll do it real slow, see? Now notice how my orbit's changing. So as we talked about earlier, we know that it's now less efficient to do it here because our efficiency point is now moved a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to time advance until I'm roughly 90 degrees again and burn some more. And I'm just little tiny corrective. What? See? 93 or 90.3, 90.5. That's pretty close, guys. I mean, if I really wanted to, I could come in here and I could like turn my engines down really low. So if I had RCS, I could get this exact. And whenever you do get it exact, it's even weirder than this. I can't get it exact with just engines on this one. The engine's way too overpowered. If I had like a little tiny engine on this thing, I could do it. But even at 6%, that poodle is giving like 12 thrust. It's 6.5%, whatever. The point being is it's still giving like 12, 13, 14 thrust or whatever, and it's just not you can't get that precise with that. So for people that play things like antenna range or remote tech, where you have to have really, really precise alignments on satellites. It's almost impossible to do this without really tiny engines and fine-tuning it quite a lot. Those little bitty tiny the little puffer engines, what are they called? The liquid fueled one and the little radial ones. Those are really, really good because they've only got like 1.5 kilonewtons thrust, tiny amounts. Alright, I think that takes care of orbits for now. And just so you guys know that I'm not a complete and total monster, there's the guys all safe and sound. I did not leave them up there in the orbit. Once again, it's been Snake. Thanks, guys. This is my first Q&A, and have fun. Guys, I got the sandcastle! Look at that! It's like the second time I've ever got it. I've been playing since like 0.18, I think. I've only gotten it twice.